Good evening, everybody. If you would like, you can open your Bibles up to Joshua chapter 11, and we'll be starting in verse 16 with the new material. And really, starting in verse 16 gives us an excellent summary of what's taken place this far. So we've got Joshua coming in and conquering the land of Canaan. And there were three big pushes, at least that's the way that that Joshua records the conquest of the land. You had the central push, which was Jericho and Ai. And then you had the southern conquest, which you remember the five kings of the different areas there in the south made a coalition to go against Gibeah. And then God used that as an opportunity for Joshua to be able to take pretty much all of them just in a couple of days or a few days there. You remember how that worked out. And so then we have the northern conquest, where the king of Hazor gathered a coalition together, and since all of them were together, God used that opportunity for Joshua to be able to conquer them. So when you look at that, you would say, well, the whole conquest only took a couple of weeks. That's not the case. But what we have there is we have highlights. We have highlights when big, major, decisive changes took place. And so there were, those three big events. But there were other battles that took place as well. So if you're looking in chapter 11, in verse 16, it says, Joshua took all of the land, the mountain country in the south, and all the land of Goshen, and the lowlands, and the Jordan plain, and the mountains. And it goes through and it lists these things. But look at verse 8. What does verse 8 say? How long was this taking place? Did I say verse 8? At verse 18 is what I meant. I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. There's no. I really keep y'all on your toes. I ask you a question and throw you a verse that has nothing to do with the question and say, all right, come up with something there. Yes. All right, a long time. Joshua made war with those kings a long time. If you look over in Joshua chapter 14 and starting in verse 7, you have Caleb talking about his age and how long it's been. Caleb was 40 when they spied out the land. How long was it from the time that they spied out the land till they went into the land? Yeah, 40 years. We're going to subtract the year that they were at Mount Sinai as well, so you really have 39 years. And then Caleb says now that he's 85. All right, so that would have been 6 years that they'd been in the land. So the conquest of the land took 6 years. So that long time is 6 years. But we're given highlights of really three very decisive victories that take place. They kind of summarize that whole 6-year period. And those were, within just a few days, a whole bunch of kings fell. But it was a longer time of conquest than that. So about a 6-year period that they're conquering the land. Any thoughts or questions so far? All right, let's look at verse 19 and 20. Colby, would you read verse 19 and 20 of chapter 11?
There was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel except the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. All the others they took in battle. For it was of the Lord to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, that he might utterly destroy them, and that they might receive no mercy, but that he might destroy them as the Lord had commanded Moses.
I think this is helpful for us to remember a couple of things. I think we normally think of, okay, God was giving the land of Canaan to Israel because God really favored Israel. And so he wanted them to have the land. He didn't, and so he's willing to kick out the Canaanites, even though they were there first. He's willing to kick them out to give the land to his preferred people. And there is some truth in that God did favor Israel. He made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to give them the land, and he was going to keep that promise. But you remember, I think we touched on this last time or class before, in Genesis chapter 15, the promise that God made to Abraham that I'm not giving you this land right now. Your descendants are going to have to be strangers in a land that's not there and serve them for 4 generations. And in the 4th generation, I'll bring you back here for, what was the reason? The iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. And so I'm going to drive them out of the land, but I'm going to drive them out of the land because of their wickedness. And their wickedness isn't enough yet. It's not wicked enough for me to punish them yet, but I know that it will be. And so in 400 years from now, well, actually it'd be like 500 years from that time. In 500 years from now, they'll be wicked enough, and I'll drive them out, and I'll give this to your descendants. I was just reading in Deuteronomy, and in my daily Bible reading, and covering the part where God says, I'm not giving you this land because of your righteousness. I'm giving it to you because of their wickedness. You're a stiff-necked people too, but you're not as wicked as them, and I'm driving them out. But now if you act like them, I'll drive you out as well. So that gives us some insight here of what's taking place. So when it talks about that God hardened their hearts, who else have we seen God harden their heart thus far in the Bible story? Pharaoh. And I don't believe that the Canaanites were like, you know, we really want to comply with what God says. We really want to repent and do what He says here. And God says, nope, I'm not allowing you to do that. I'm hardening your heart. I don't think that's the way it works. I think what God does is He uses the disposition of those people to accomplish His purposes. Now, His purpose was He was going to punish them because of their wickedness. Their disposition was, all right, well, let's band together and fight against Him then. Well, that made it work out for God's purposes there. But now, not everyone had that disposition. There were a few that didn't. Who were those few? Yes, who would that be? The Gibeonites. And can you think of another individual? Rahab. And so this is a beautiful picture to me where God has determined judgment. I know I've mentioned this before. God's determined judgment on this group of people. He's going to use their disposition to bring about this judgment. They're going to stand up and try to fight against Him, which is futile, and they're going to be destroyed in the process. But there are a few who fear Him and say, no, that's not what we want to do. Does God override their free will? No. He gives them their free will. Their faith in Him drives them to come to Him for help, and He responds to their faith and says it. So if there's ever a time where you look at it and say, this idea that, well, man has no free will, this would be a situation where God's going to use the disposition because He's determined judgment. But if someone used their free will to repent and turn, He would be willing to relent in that. Any thoughts, comments? Okay. 21 through 22.
And at that time Joshua came and cut off the Anakim from the mountains, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, from all the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them with their cities. None of the Anakim were left in the land of the children of Israel. They remained only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod.
All right, so who are the Anakim? Giants. These are the ones that the Israelites were afraid of, that they heard about, that the spies came back and reported, and they were like, well, we can't take them, and they are taking them without any trouble. And so now this is a summary statement. We're actually going to get another story about Caleb driving them out of Hebron in just a little bit. But he's cutting off the giants from the land. But they remained where? Yeah, I want you to, I don't know if you can see on this map or not. I don't even know if I can read it. There's Gaza's going to be right down here. Ashdod is going to be right in here. What area is that? Yes. So if they're all cut off here, how is it that we have David fighting one some 500 years later?
They remained there. They
remained in the land of the Philistines, and that was Goliath was a Philistine of Gath, if I remember correctly. And so we see that there. So here's an explanation. They were cut off, but they did remain in the territory of the Philistines, and because of the unfaithfulness of the children of Israel, by David's time, they were still not completely wiped out or defeated. Any other thoughts through chapter 11? All right, we're gonna fast forward a little bit through some of this because it can be a little bit tedious, and it's not that it's not important, but it probably had more significance to the children of Israel than it has to us. So we're going to try to get the general idea without going into every village and or every king that's named and every location that's named here. So chapter 12, 1 through 6 gives us a summary of the kings that were conquered by Moses. Now Moses didn't enter into the land of Canaan, so where would have these kings had to have been conquered at? On the other side. That's exactly right. So then verses 7 through 24 gives us the kings that were conquered by Joshua in the land of Canaan proper. So the kings that were conquered by Moses on the Transjordanic side, over here, we had Sihon. In this area, we had Og, king of Bashan. Actually, it's going to be up here, king of Bashan, was conquered by them. And you notice some of the places that are mentioned. Verse 2, Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt at Heshbon. And it talks about the river Arnon, which is going to be right here. So his territory started right there and went northward. You see all the way to the Jabbok River, verse 2. Remember the Jabbok River right there in the middle? So all of this territory right here was Sihon, king of the Amorites. Notice verse 3, and the eastern Jordan plain from the Sea of Chinneroth. All right, I mentioned this, I think, the other day. Sea of Chinneroth. What's that? Sea of Galilee. Very good. So if the Bible names are not confusing enough, the locations, you've got to learn about three of them and remember what they are. So the Sea of Chinneroth is another name for the Sea of Galilee up here. And then you notice the next thing, as far as the Sea of Arabah. Do you know what that sea is? Yes, you have a hint here, the Salt Sea, the Dead Sea. So all the way down here. So this whole territory here is what's under consideration. So again, there's another name for you. So if someone ever says, do you know what another name for the Dead Sea is? You can say, the Sea of Arabah. And you have that down now. Or another name for the Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Chinneroth. And so, anyway, there you go. Yeah, that's right. Sounds scholarly. Say it without stuttering.
I would just tell them the Salt Sea.
The Salt Sea. There you go. Yeah, like we have the Mediterranean, or for the drill class, the Great Big Sea, or the Big Sea, or or the one that's blue. No, over that way. All right. And then you have in verse 4, Og, king of Bashan, in his territory. And he was a remnant of the giants. And so it's mentioned there. Mount Hermon, I don't think Mount Hermon is labeled on this map, but Mount Hermon is going to be right up in this area, if I remember correctly. And then you have the border of Sihon mentioned there. So verse 6 says, Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the children of Israel had conquered, and Moses, the servant of the Lord, had been given possession to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. So those 2.5 tribes are going to settle this territory conquered by these kings over here. And then in verse 7, these are the kings of the country which Joshua and the children of Israel conquered on this side of the Jordan on the west. And so it's going to go through and name all of the kings that are there. And I threatened to have Colby read all of those names, but for the sake of time, we won't do that. But you'll notice some of these cities, like you notice in verse 9, the king of Jericho, the king of Ai. You notice in verse 10, the king of Jerusalem. I want you to hold on to that. The king of Hebron, that's one that we'll mention in a second. And then those kings that we talked about in the southern conquest, and then also the kings that we talked about in the northern conquest, the king of Hazor and of those, Megiddo. We talked about all of those. Now look at verse 24. How many kings were there total? 31 kings total. And so these are the principal cities. These are, when you're talking about the kings, these would be the fortified cities. These would be the places that put up resistance. These would be the people who would be a threat to the children of Israel. And by the time that we get to the end of chapter 12, what it's doing is it's giving us a summary that all of these were eliminated. All of these were conquered. Now go back and think about 40 years before, the spies coming back and say, oh yeah, we saw the land, and it's a good land. Whew, but boy, do they have some warriors and do they have some fortifications. Do you see what's being described here? All of that now has been conquered. That was not a problem. Joshua was able to do all of this and do it in a 6-year period. And so we see this summary is significant to the Jews because it builds their faith to say, oh yeah, we were worried about that, but that's not a problem. That's not a problem. We were able to conquer that. And it builds our faith as we read it as well. Thoughts or comments through chapter 12?
Good question. One part that mentions the Rephaim, they were giants along with the Anakim.
Yes, that's right. And I have read something on this in the past, and it has to do with the Hebrew wording and something, but I can't explain it, so I'm not going to attempt to anymore. For our purposes, it's safe to say yes, they're the giants. There may be a distinction in them to some degree, but it's basically you have the giants and the Anakim are the same. What's that? I believe that's right. Yes, I think that's right.
I have a question right quick
Okay.
because it deals with my invitation.
Okay.
So Joshua, obviously, when him and Caleb went and spied out the land, they believed they could take it.
Yes.
But at this point, do you? I'm not saying was there any doubt? Did Joshua doubt that they could? Because I know he didn't. He believed they could. But wouldn't you think that there would have been some discomfort, maybe some fear of the conditions that he was going into here to conquer this land? What is your thoughts on that?
So I think about, I'm gonna frame it in terms that, and maybe this is not your question, but I think about, so what level of nervousness should we have when we attempt to do God's will? In other words, when you know that you should go talk to somebody about the gospel, do you feel any fear? All right. If you have faith, do you still feel some nervousness? I think so. So I don't know that eliminated everything. Like Joshua was like, I don't have a butterfly in my stomach. I'm not worried about this. I slept perfect last night. I don't know if that's the way that faith always responds. But I think what faith does is, somebody defined courage one time is being afraid but doing it anyway, or something like that. It's the idea that you realize this is what I need to do. This is what it takes to do, and I trust this is going to work out. And I'm going to do it. I don't know that means that you have no butterflies or no nervousness about it all. Jesus going to the cross, was there any was he disturbed at all of that? Yes, he was, but he trusted in him, whom he had believed. In other words, he acted in faith in doing that, but there was he still battled with emotions there. And so I can imagine that Joshua battled with emotions, but still had faith in that. And I think that we can too. If faith is only, well, I don't know how to say it. Maybe I'm just excusing myself. There are very few things that I've done that have been difficult that I've done by faith that I still didn't have, not anxiety, maybe that's too strong of a word, but some nervousness about, that this was challenging for me to do, but I trusted that God would help me in it.
That answered it perfect.
Okay.
We don't have to have an invitation tonight, Lonnie.
All right. There we go.
Lonnie took care of that for me.
We're going to get out early tonight, folks.
So, remember that they tore their clothes.
Yes.
When they came back, they told everybody that Caleb tore his clothes, right?
Yes.
And so Caleb said, we're going to read that he's going to want that area, right?
Right.
So look at the end of chapter 14. Yeah. Does that talk about Hebrew?
Yes. Uh-huh.
All right, look at that name. I'm not going to try to pronounce it.
What verse are you in?
Verse 15.
Okay, verse 15. Yes. Uh-huh.
The one that starts with K, right?
Yeah. Kirjath Arbor.
Now go back to Genesis chapter 23. Verse 2. And you know where I'm going with this. Because who's buried there?
Sarah, maybe?
And who else ended up being buried there? And who else ended up being buried there? And who else ended up being buried there? Sarah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? All were buried in
In
Hebron.
yeah, in Hebron, yeah.
That's the same. Now,
Right.
they were spying out the land, and you've been told by Moses, who is our God? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he spied out their very spot where they were buried.
Right.
And that's where the giants were.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate faith that you've been talking about.
Yeah.
That would encourage me.
Yeah.
And so when he took the land with the tribe of Judah, because he's from the tribe of Judah, you're going to read, I want this land. It's my
Right.
inheritance, right? That's
Yeah.
what we're going to read in chapter 14.
Right.
And I can't help but think, I want this land because this is where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah are buried.
Right.
Fathers of faith.
Yeah.
So I can conquer giants.
Yeah. That's right. Good. You stole my thunder on that a little bit, but that's good. That's a good comment.
So you can see why he ripped his clothes back there.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine the anxiety, or not the anxiety, I keep using that word, it's not the word I want, but the turmoil that he felt there when it's like, are you kidding me? This is slipping away from us because of your unbelief here. And, yeah, good point. All right. Anything else before we get into, where are we at here? Lost my place. Chapter 13. Chapter 13 is one of those occasions in the Scripture, those accounts in the Scripture that I really, really love to envision. First of all, verse 1, Joshua was old and advanced in years. And the Lord said to him, you are old, advanced in years. God always tells you the truth. And so God just lays it out there. You're old and you're advanced in years. And there remains very much land yet to possess. All right, so going back, let's go back to this map here. This area in red is the land that they have conquered. Actually, they've conquered maybe some that's not in red here. So when it says there's very much land yet to possess, they weren't possessing all of this land. They had just conquered it. Do you understand the difference? In other words, those kings were the resistance. They have defeated the kings. There's no more resistance. But they don't even have enough people to occupy all of the land at this point. And God said it was going to be that way. He said He would drive them out slowly. So what happens is, in this 6-year conquest, they are defeating all of the threats to them. There's no more threats. But at the same time, they haven't driven out all of the people. They're not possessing and occupying all of the land. But there's nobody that can challenge them anymore. And so now Joshua's old, and God says, there's more to do here, but you're old. You're advanced in years. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to divide the land up. I'm dropping down to verse 7 there. Now, therefore, divide this land as the inhabitants of the 9 tribes and the half tribe of Manasseh. So you're not going to be here to see the fulfillment of them occupying all of this land. So what I want you to do is to go ahead right now that the threat has been taken care of, and go ahead and divide the land up into allotments to give to the different ones. Now, what the task is going to be of each tribe from this point on is you're given this piece of land. Now, you go in and you start to occupy the different cities and drive out the remaining inhabitants of the land. So there's been a unified collaboration of all of the Israelites in defeating these major threats that we've talked about. But now it's time to divide the land up and say, okay, now this is your territory. Now you go in and take care of this territory. This is your territory, and you go in and drive out the remaining of the inhabitants there and occupy the land. So that's what's being said here in the first part of chapter 13. But you notice in verse 2, this is the land that yet remains, all the territory of the Philistines and the Gershites from Shur. And you'll also notice in verse 4, the Sidonians, verse 5, Lebanon. And so I want you to notice on this map here, the green area where Philistia is, the green area up here where Phoenicia is. They've not really conquered this land. Now, there's not any threats there necessarily, but we haven't even talked about this land. We know that there are still Anakim, giants, living in Philistia. That's already been mentioned. And so, but the rest of the land is, at least all the threats have been eliminated at this point. So you see this discussion here. Joshua had done his job, but he needed to go ahead and divide up the land before his leadership role was over. Any thoughts or questions through verse 7? All right, so starting in verse 8, we're talking about the land on the east side of the Jordan, the Transjordanic tribes. You know how many tribes are going to settle over there?
3.
Yes. Yeah, 2.5 is right, but yeah, 3. And so we see some of the borders here. Notice that you have the Arnon, which is right here in the middle of the Dead Sea. That's mentioned in verse 9. You have Gilead, which is going to be this land right up here. You have that mentioned in verse 11. You have Mount Hermon and Bashan in verse 11. That's going to be this land up here is going to be mentioned there. It mentions Og, king of Bashan, there in verse 12. And so it mentions this territory, and it says, now this is going to belong to Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. So starting in verse 15, it tells us how Moses had given to Reuben the inheritance that began at the Arnon River in verse 16. So it begins right down here by the Dead Sea. And then you see Heshbon is mentioned in verse 17. That's a significant city. Verse 20, the slopes of Pisgah, since we're talking about places with multiple names. What's another name for Mount Pisgah? Did you catch that? Nebo. That's right, Mount Nebo. Mount Nebo. So that's going to be right up here. That's where Moses overlooked the land before he died. And so that's going to be in Reuben's land as well. And then you notice that the banks of the Jordan is going to be their western border there. I tell you what, let me swap over to be easier to see. So their territory is going to extend from Arnon, Mount Pisgah or Mount Nebo, right in this area, and then come all the way over to the mouth of the Jordan. That's going to belong to Reuben. Now, Gad is going to be right above that, starting in verse 24. Moses had also given an inheritance to the tribe of Gad, and some of the places that it mentions is Heshbon, which is going to be right here. That's going to be a border town between Reuben and Gad. So the southern part is going to be Heshbon. Then you'll notice it says the Jordan was its border and the far edge of the Sea of Chinneroth. So all the way up to the Sea of Galilee or the Sea of Chinneroth. This map has it drawn where they just have a little sliver of land all the way up there. Maybe that's the way it was. It's not sure. But it goes all the way up to there. And then starting in verse 29, you have given to the half-tribe of Manasseh. And it says, all the land of Bashan, and only half of Gilead, verse 30 and 31. So the land of Bashan is up here. They would receive all of that, and then part of the land of Gilead. Gilead normally goes from the Jabbok River up to the Yarmuk River. So this area right here, half of that was going to belong to Manasseh, and then all of the land of Bashan up here. What was the land of Bashan known for in the Bible? Cows. That's exactly right. And it was some of the best pasture land in that area. And that's one of the reasons why these tribes wanted that side, is because they had much livestock and they saw that this would be good land for that. Any thoughts, anything you want to mention about chapter 13? So we have the 2.5 tribes on that side. So now that Moses is the one who gave them that land. But now it's time for Joshua, the new leader, who's not going to be a leader much longer, to divide up the land to the 9.5 tribes on the other side. So that brings us to chapter 14. And it says in verse, you want to read verse 1 to, I tell you what, read verses 1 through 5 if you don't mind.
Okay. These are the areas which the children of Israel inherited in the land of Canaan, which Eleazar the priest, Joshua the son of Nun, and the heads of the fathers of the tribes of the children of Israel distributed as an inheritance to them. Their inheritance was by lot, as the Lord had commanded by the hand of Moses for the 9 tribes and the half-tribe. For Moses had given the inheritance of the 2 tribes and the half-tribe on the other side of the Jordan, but to the Levites he had given no inheritance among them. For the children of Joseph were 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim, and they gave no part to the Levites in the land, except cities to dwell in, with their common lands for their livestock and their property, as the Lord had commanded Moses. So the children of Israel did, and they divided the land.
So there are a few things that are interesting here. First of all, according to the instruction that was given by Moses to Joshua, Joshua is going to do this. And who else is going to be instrumental in this? It's mentioned by name here. Eleazar. And he's the priest. He's the high priest now, since Aaron has died. And so they're going to do this. And how are they going to divide it up? Yes, and I would love to have more information about that. You know, here's the way I imagine it doing. They took 10 names and put it into a hat, and they drove going, Ephraim, where are you at? All right, Ephraim, this thing goes to you. I don't know how that would work, because it's not just by lot, it's also that the larger tribes would receive more land and the smaller tribes would receive a smaller portion of land. So the location that they were to settle in was apparently by lot. The size of the territory, according to other instruction, would be according to the size of the tribe. However, I have to think this is done with some equality. You notice on this, look how much territory Judah and Simeon's going to be interspersed in there. But they have this huge area. If this map doesn't do it justice, because it goes all the way down to the Brook of Egypt, which is right down here. So they've got an area that equals almost this whole other area. How is that fair? Bigger tribe. They were a bigger tribe, but not 5 times bigger than all the other tribes. How many of you been to West Texas? You haven't missed much. All right. Texas is huge, isn't it? When you go to West Texas and you drive for 4 or 5 hours and you pass 3 houses and you realize there's a lot of nothing out here. Well, a lot of the Negev, this southern territory, was like that. And the reason, the reason that they have 20,000 acre ranches out in Texas is because it takes that much land to keep a decent herd of cattle alive. And you got to have a lot of land because it's poor land. This is not the best land, but they're given a lot of it to make up for that. So I would have to say, now I'm not an expert on Palestinian geography, so I'm not going to be able to say, and this is the reason why this and this, but there has to be some equality in that. So the way that God was directing this is larger tribes get more land, but it was also by lot. So when I think of lot, it's just sheer chance. But that's not the way that it was often used in the Scripture. Lots were drawn, and it was to determine God's will. Do you remember Achan? How did they determine who the perpetrator was of the taking of the accursed thing? By lot. And a family was taken, or a tribe was taken, and then a family was taken, and then the man was taken. And we'll see this on other occasions. The apostles, when they were choosing a replacement for Judas, how did they do that? By lot. Was that just random? It's like, well, we just so happened that this. No, they prayed to God. God, direct this. And God did. And so it wasn't that this was by chance, but this was the way they were determining God's will on it, if that makes sense. Notice verse 4. It says, the children of Joseph were 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. So how many tribes would that give us now then? How many brothers were there? 12. So that would be the 12 tribes, right? But then one of the brothers, his sons are made members or tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. So how many would that give us? Well, how does that work? You take away 1 and add 2 and you still have 12? Who's the other one? Levi. So you're going to see different lists in the Scripture, and I know most of you know this, but I'm explaining this because it is a point of confusion if you're not familiar with this. You'll see lists in which Levi is listed as a tribe. If Levi is mentioned as a tribe, generally then Ephraim and Manasseh are not going to be listed. Joseph will be listed. If Ephraim and Manasseh are listed, then Levi is probably not included in that. And there's a reason. Levi, where's the tribe of Levi? What land are they given? They're scattered throughout. So in this list, Ephraim and Manasseh are going to be listed because they were given tribal territories. Levi was not given a tribal territory. So that's how you still end up with 12 tribes in that. And so here's the explanation. If somebody ever asks you that, well, I don't understand. Here, verse 4 of chapter 14 is where the explanation is given how that works. Anything else through verse 5 that y'all would like to mention? Okay, let's get to one of my favorite parts here. So in verse 6, the children of Judah came to Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, the Kenite, said to him, now think about this picture. Think about these two individuals. What do we know about Joshua at this point right now? We've just been told that he's what? He's old. So what would Caleb be? Caleb would be old. As a matter of fact, who else is as old as they are here? Nobody, because everybody else their age died out. And so here you have the two oldest people left in the nation of Israel, and one comes to the other. And don't you know, these guys have some history together, good history together. And can you imagine how they view each other, what they've been through together? And so Caleb comes to Joshua, and he says, you know the word which the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought back word to him as was in my heart. Now, let's read a little bit further. Nevertheless, my brethren who went up with me made the heart of the people melt, but I wholly followed the Lord my God. Let's go back. Hold your place there. And let's just go back to Numbers chapter 13 and just look at that, refresh our thinking about that just for a minute. Because this is pretty powerful to me. So in Numbers chapter 13, they go in and they spy out the land, and they come back, and all of the spies agree in verse 27, we went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey. This is its fruit. Now, Mike made the point that the area, I don't know if all of the spies stayed together the whole time or if they spread out when they went in to spy out the land. But the area that Caleb spied out was the land of Hebron. And he saw the goodness of that land. And not just that it grew great produce, but I like what Mike said, that's where our ancestors are buried. That's where the patriarchs are buried. And he comes back and he said, I spoke what was in my heart. It's a good land. But they go on to say, nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. You know what I think Caleb would say to that? That's true. That's all true. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. The Amalekite dwell to the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea along the banks of the Jordan. That's true. That's all true. Caleb quieted the people and said before Moses, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. I spoke what was in my heart at that time. We are able to take it. That's true that there are giants in the land. It's true there's fortified cities there. It's true that it's a good land, and it's true that God said He'd give it to us. Let's go and take it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave a bad report. And they started talking about how big the giants were and how insignificant that they were. And so all the children of Israel began to murmur, only we had died in the land of Egypt. Now, drop down and notice verse 6. Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb, these same two old fellas that are talking with each other right now where we're at, back 46 years before, they were speaking, and here's what they said. They spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel. They tore their clothes, as Mike mentioned. And they said, the land that we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then He shall bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. I love that expression. What would be an equivalent of that today? We could eat them for lunch. Yeah, they're giants. Yeah, they have fortified cities. They are our bread if the Lord delights us. Their protection has departed from them. The Lord is with us. Do not fear them. But the congregation wouldn't listen. Caleb comes to Joshua and he says, you remember that? And of course Joshua remembers that. He said, I spoke what was in my heart that day. Joshua spoke what was in his heart that day. The camaraderie between these two at this moment. Verse 9. I'm back over in Joshua chapter 14 now. So Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land where your foot has trodden shall be your inheritance and your children's forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God. Why was Caleb going to get to go into the land and inherit the land that he had spied out? Because his faith, he wholly followed the Lord. And now here he is, 46 years later, and he says, and now, behold, the Lord has kept me alive, as he has said, these 45, let me just go with 45 years. That would be, since that's what the text says here. These 45 years, ever since the Lord spoke this word to Moses while Israel wandered in the wilderness. And now, here I am this day, 85 years old. As yet, I'm as strong this day as I was on the day that Moses sent me in. Just as my strength was then, so is my strength for war, both going out and for coming in. Now, that sounds a little... Now, I understand Moses is going to live... How long did Moses live? 120 years. 120 years, right? And so when he was 80 is just when the Lord was calling him to lead the children of Israel out. And Caleb is 85 here. So maybe people were living a little bit longer, but he's old and advanced in years. And to say, I'm just as strong now as I was then. And he specifies, for going to war, for coming in and going out. Maybe he was in exceptionally good shape. But I don't think that's what was really under consideration here. Because was it his ability to go to war and his really good physical condition that was going to win the battle 45 years ago? What was it? His faith. Has his faith weakened in him? No. And that's what I love. Because you know what? I'm past my prime when it comes to my physical strength. But I hope I'm not past my prime when it comes to my faith.
He wasn't ready to retire.
No, he wasn't. Don Ezel, how old are you? I'm sorry to call you out like this. God would be honest. Are you old? You're 83? 83 years old. I believe that your faith is probably stronger now than you were when you were 40 years old. Now, I don't know that, but I would say there's a good chance that that's the case. I hope that my faith is stronger than when I was 40 years old. We can still do the Lord's work. And Joshua recognized that. That when it comes to God's work, 85 or 40, I trust that the Lord will equip me to do this, and I'm just as ready as I was then and prepared to do it. And so here he says in verse 11, as yet I'm as strong this day as I was on the day when Moses sent me in. Just as my strength was then, so my strength is for war, both going in and going out. Now therefore give me this mountain, which the Lord spoke in that day. For you heard in that day how the Anakim were there, and that the cities were great and fortified. May it be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall be able to drive them out as the Lord said. Those giants are still there, and God said to drive them out. Give me this mountain. 85-year-old man talking to another aged man. The camaraderie between these two. They've longed for this day. And now Caleb is saying, the day's come, let me go in and possess this land. And what does Joshua do in verse 13? He blessed him, and he gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, as an inheritance. Hebron therefore became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, as it is to this day. Because why? He wholly followed the God of Israel. And the name for Hebron formerly was Kirjath Arba. Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim. So if you're talking about a place that ought to be hard to take, it would be where the greatest man above the Anakim was from. And Caleb said, you give me that mountain. Maybe 85 years old, but the Lord is just as capable of giving it to me today as he was at any time. And but it's a beautiful picture of two men of faith. And here they are in their latter years and still serving in the Lord's army just as faithfully. Comments, questions?
What's the contrast between this story and Joshua 13, verse 13, where it says, nevertheless, the children of Israel expel not the people.
That's right. That's exactly right. Not everybody had the faith of Caleb. That's right. Very good. Thank you. We'll explore that a little bit more next time. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.